The waitress wrinkled her nose as she looked at the man in the corner booth. His jacket was patched, his boots worn thin, and his gray beard needed trimming. "We don't serve his kind here," she whispered to her manager. But Sarah Martinez, the night shift cook, recognized something others missed. The way he sat perfectly straight, the careful fold of his hands, the distant look of someone who had seen too much. She had seen that look before in her father's eyes after he returned from Desert Storm. When the manager tried to throw him out, he had no idea he was about to humiliate a Medal of Honor recipient whose story would change everything. His name was Thomas "Tank" Morrison, though the nickname came not from his size, but from his legendary service with the 1st Armored Division. That cold November evening, he wasn't looking for recognition or sympathy. All he wanted was a hot meal and a moment's peace before catching the late bus to the VA hospital for his monthly appointment. The same hospital where he'd spent 18 months learning to walk again after an IED took his left leg below the knee. Tank entered Murphy's all-night diner like any other customer, though his gait was slightly uneven, a permanent reminder of Fallujah 2004. He wore his old field jacket, faded but clean, with the patches carefully sewn back on every time they came loose. In his pocket, he carried his VA card, $47 in crumpled bills, and a small leather pouch containing his father's dog tags from Vietnam and his own from Iraq. He chose the corner booth because it gave him a clear view of both entrances, old habits from convoy duty. The vinyl seat cracked under his weight, and he removed his knit cap to reveal silver hair cropped military short. He studied the laminated menu under the harsh fluorescent light, calculating what he could afford. But when waitress Jennifer Walsh approached his table, everything changed. She was young, maybe 22, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of judgmental expression that comes from never having lived through real hardship. "We have a dress code here," she announced loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Clean clothes, proper appearance. Maybe you should try the shelter down the street." Tank looked up calmly. "I'd just like coffee and maybe some eggs, miss. I can pay." Jennifer's lips curled into a sneer. "Sure you can, buddy. That's what they all say." She turned to her manager, Derek Hoffman, a thin man in his 30s who prided himself on running a respectable establishment. "Derek, this gentleman claims he wants to order, but look at him. He's obviously homeless. What if paying customers complain?" Derek strutted over, his chest puffed with false authority. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a family restaurant, and we can't have people loitering." Tank's voice remained steady. "I'm not loitering. I'm a customer trying to order a meal." "Do you even have money?" Derek demanded, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. Several customers looked up from their plates, some with amusement, others with disgust. Tank reached into his jacket and pulled out the wrinkled bills. $47. Derek barely glanced at the money. "Probably stolen, or begged for on some street corner. We don't want your kind of business here." From the kitchen window, Sarah Martinez watched the scene unfold with growing anger. She had been cooking at Murphy's for 3 years, working nights to put herself through nursing school. Her father, Sergeant First Class Miguel Martinez, had taught her to recognize soldiers, active duty or retired, by their bearing, their discipline, their way of scanning rooms for threats. This man was military. She was certain of it. "Derek," she called through the service window. "Maybe you should." "Stay out of this, Sarah," Derek snapped. "Get back to your grill." But Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "That man's a veteran," she said quietly. Derek laughed harshly. "Oh, please. You think every homeless guy claiming to be a vet actually served? Half of them are frauds looking for handouts." Tank's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained seated. He had faced down insurgents, survived 3 tours, and buried too many friends to be rattled by a small-town restaurant manager. But the whispers from other tables stung more than he cared to admit. "Probably spent his military money on drugs," someone muttered. "They should check IDs before letting people like that in here," another voice added. Jennifer crossed her arms triumphantly. "See? Even the customers are uncomfortable. Sir, I'm calling the police if you don't leave right now." That's when the diner's bell chimed, and Colonel James "Hawk" Henderson walked in. Henderson was off duty, driving back from a late meeting at the National Guard Armory when he decided to stop for coffee. The 54-year-old officer had served for 32 years, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan. He wore civilian clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and a baseball cap, but carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. His eyes immediately found Tank in the corner booth, and something clicked into place. The posture, the watchful eyes, the way the man's left hand rested protectively over his jacket pocket, all classic tells of a combat veteran. Then Henderson saw the patches on Tank's jacket, and his blood went cold. 1st Armored Division. Iraq Campaign Medal. Purple Heart. "Excuse me," Henderson said, his voice cutting through the diner's chatter. "Is there a problem here?" Derek turned, annoyed by the interruption. "Nothing we can't handle, sir. Just removing an undesirable element." Henderson's eyes narrowed. "Undesirable element? This homeless man is bothering our customers," Jennifer explained, oblivious to the danger in Henderson's tone. "We've asked him to leave, but he won't go." Henderson walked slowly to Tank's booth, his gaze taking in every detail, the careful way the patches were sewn, the precise military creases still visible in the worn fabric, the small bulge in the pocket that could only be dog tags. "What unit?" Henderson asked quietly. Tank looked up, recognizing authority when he heard it. "1st Armored, sir. Operation Iraqi Freedom, 2003 to 2005. 3rd deployment?" "Yes, sir. Convoy security and forward reconnaissance." Henderson nodded slowly, then turned to face the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the unmistakable tone of command that made everyone freeze. "This man," he said, pointing to Tank, "is a decorated combat veteran who served 3 tours in Iraq with one of the finest armored divisions in the United States Army." The diner fell silent. Henderson continued, his voice rising. "While you were safe in your beds, he was dodging roadside bombs and protecting supply convoys. While you were complaining about gas prices, he was bleeding for this country in a desert on the other side of the world." He fixed Derek with a stare that could melt steel. "And you want to throw him out because his clothes aren't fancy enough for your establishment?" Derek's face went pale. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," Henderson snapped, "because you judged a man by his appearance instead of his character. You saw worn clothes and assumed worthlessness. You looked at a hero and saw a burden." The colonel reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card, placing it on Tank's table. "Sergeant Morrison. And yes, I know who you are now. My name is Colonel Henderson. I've heard of your actions at Checkpoint Bravo. The Army Times wrote about what you did there." Tank's eyes widened slightly. The checkpoint incident wasn't something he discussed. 3 hours under fire, holding a position while wounded, allowing a medical convoy to pass safely. 18 soldiers owed their lives to his actions that day. Henderson turned back to Derek, who now looked like he wanted to disappear. "This man received the Bronze Star with V device for valor under fire. He earned the Purple Heart after an IED took his leg. He spent 18 months in rehabilitation, learning to walk again, and you wouldn't serve him coffee." The silence in the diner was deafening. Sarah stepped forward from behind the counter. "Sir," she said to Tank, her voice gentle but firm, "your meal is on the house. Whatever you want, as much as you want." "Mine too," said an elderly man at the counter, standing slowly. "Name's Bill Patterson, Navy, Korea. Anyone who served deserves better than this." One by one, other customers began to stand. A young mother with 2 children, a truck driver still wearing his company cap, an off-duty police officer. Even the teenagers in the back booth put down their phones and showed respect. Jennifer looked around frantically, realizing the magnitude of her mistake. I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "You meant exactly what you said," Henderson cut her off. "You judged this man based on his appearance and found him lacking. The question is, what are you going to do about it now?" Derek stepped forward nervously. Sergeant Morrison, I sincerely apologize. Your meal is completely free, and I want to personally." Tank held up a weathered hand. "I didn't come here for apologies or free meals. I came here to pay for my food like any other customer. The fact that you tried to deny me that right says more about you than it does about me." He stood slowly, his artificial leg making the movement deliberate but dignified. "But I'll accept your apology because that's what we do. We forgive, even when forgiveness isn't earned." Henderson extended his hand. Sergeant, it would be my honor to buy your dinner, not as charity, but as one soldier to another. Tank studied the colonel's face for a long moment, then nodded. Coffee would be good, sir. Black. Sarah, Henderson called to the cook, bring this man the best meal you can make, and make it a double portion. He looks like he hasn't eaten properly in days. As Tank settled back into his booth, the atmosphere in the diner completely shifted. Bill Patterson moved to sit across from him, and soon they were trading stories about military service. The police officer stopped by to shake his hand. Even the teenagers approached nervously to thank him for his service. Jennifer served the coffee with shaking hands, her earlier arrogance replaced by genuine remorse. Sergeant Morrison, I owe you a real apology. I judged you unfairly, and that was wrong. Tank looked up at her with tired but kind eyes. We all make mistakes, miss. The important thing is learning from them. Derek hovered nearby, clearly struggling with his own guilt. Finally, he approached the table. Sergeant, I want to do something to make this right. What can I do? Tank was quiet for a moment, then pointed to a blank wall near the entrance. You could put up a small sign there. Something simple. Maybe all veterans welcome. Not for me, but for others who might come in looking rough around the edges. Some of us are still fighting battles you can't see. Derek nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely. I'll have one made tomorrow. When Sarah brought the food, a perfectly prepared steak dinner with all the fixings, she sat down briefly beside Tank. My father served too, she said quietly. Desert Storm. He came home different like you. Took him years to find his way back to civilian life. Tank nodded understanding. The transition's harder than the fighting sometimes. How's he doing now? Better. He works with other veterans, helps them navigate the VA system. Maybe you two should meet sometime. I'd like that, Tank said, meaning it. Colonel Henderson stayed for over an hour, and their conversation drew a small crowd of listeners. Tank spoke about his service without boasting, answering questions about military life with honesty and humor. By the time he finished eating, the entire diner had transformed from a place of judgment to one of respect and understanding. When Tank finally prepared to leave, every person in the restaurant stood. It wasn't planned or orchestrated. It just happened naturally, as if the entire room suddenly understood what they were witnessing. Henderson walked him to the door. Sergeant, I meant what I said earlier. If you need anything, medical care, job assistance, housing help, you call that number. The guard takes care of its own, active or retired. Tank shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. But I'm managing. The VA appointment tomorrow should help with the leg pain, and I've got a job interview next week at the railroad yard. What kind of work? Maintenance supervisor. Turns out military logistics experience translates pretty well to civilian operations. Henderson smiled. I'm not surprised. Good luck, soldier. As Tank walked into the night, the diner erupted in conversation about what they had just witnessed. Derek immediately took down a promotional poster from the front window and replaced it with a handwritten sign, Veterans always welcome here. The next morning, the story began to spread through the small town. Not through social media or news reports, but through word of mouth, the way important stories are meant to travel. Sarah told her father, who told his veteran support group. Henderson mentioned it to his fellow officers. Bill Patterson shared it at the VFW hall. Within a week, Murphy's all-night diner had become an unofficial gathering place for local veterans. Derek, humbled by his mistake, instituted a permanent 10% military discount and hired 2 veterans as part-time staff. Jennifer, genuinely changed by the experience, began volunteering at the homeless shelter and discovered that many of its residents were indeed veterans struggling with PTSD, addiction, or unemployment. Tank got the railroad job and became a regular customer at Murphy's, usually stopping by after his evening shifts. He never mentioned the incident again, but his presence served as a constant reminder of the lessons learned that night. 3 months later, a local newspaper reporter heard the story and wanted to write about it. But when she approached Tank for an interview, he politely declined. It wasn't about me, he said simply. It was about people learning to see past the surface. That lesson's more important than any story you could write. The reporter respected his wishes, but did write a general piece about the town's growing support for veterans, mentioning Murphy's Diner as an example of community acceptance and the importance of not judging people by their appearance. Colonel Henderson was promoted to Brigadier General the following year, but before leaving for his new assignment, he established a small emergency fund for local veterans facing temporary hardships. The fund was administered through Murphy's Diner, with Derek serving as an unofficial coordinator. "It seems fitting," Henderson explained to Sarah, "that a place which learned such an important lesson should help others in need." Sarah graduated nursing school and was immediately hired by the VA hospital. Her first patient was Tank Morrison, who came in for a routine prosthetic adjustment. They recognized each other immediately, and she became his regular nurse, their friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of service and sacrifice. Derek kept the Veterans Welcome sign in the window long after it was necessary. New employees were told the story of Tank Morrison as part of their training, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder that every customer deserves dignity and respect. The booth where Tank sat that night became known informally as the Respect Table. It wasn't marked or specially decorated, but regular customers knew its significance. Veterans often chose to sit there, and the staff always provided exceptional service at that table. Years later, when Derek's own son expressed interest in military service, the manager knew exactly who to call for advice. Tank spent an entire evening with the young man, sharing honest insights about military life, both its challenges and its rewards. "Service changes you," Tank explained. "It teaches you about sacrifice, about putting others before yourself, about finding strength you didn't know you had. But it also makes coming home complicated sometimes. The important thing is remembering that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." The young man enlisted in the Army and wrote to Tank regularly throughout his service. When he returned home after his deployment, his first stop was Murphy's Diner, where Tank waited with a cup of coffee and a listening ear. The story of that November night lives on, not in headlines or viral videos, but in the way people treat each other. Murphy's Diner became a place where judgment was left at the door, where service was honored, and where everyone learned that true character isn't revealed by the clothes you wear, but by how you treat others when they're at their most vulnerable. Tank Morrison never sought recognition for his military service or for the dignity he showed that night. He simply wanted to be treated as a human being deserving of basic respect. But in standing up for himself with quiet courage, he reminded an entire community about the difference between looking and seeing, between assumption and understanding. The challenge coin he carried, earned through blood and sacrifice, remained in his pocket, a reminder that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with patience, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are, regardless of what others might think. And in a small town where a diner learned to see beyond appearances, that lesson continues to echo, one interaction at a time, proving that sometimes the most important victories happen not on distant battlefields, but in the everyday moments when we choose respect over judgment, understanding over assumption, and dignity over prejudice. Thomas Tank Morrison never asked to be remembered as a hero. He simply wanted to eat his dinner in peace and catch the bus to his doctor's appointment. But in that desire for basic human dignity, he reminded everyone who witnessed that night what true honor looks like, not in the medals earned or the battles fought, but in the quiet strength of character that no uniform can contain and no hardship can diminish. In the end, that's what made the story worth telling and the lesson worth learning. That heroism isn't always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it's as simple as maintaining your dignity in the face of disrespect and showing grace to those who have wronged you. Because some battles are won not with force, but with the simple act of remaining who you are, no matter how others choose to see you.